Welcome to the archive, Renee Fleury. It is exciting to have you on today. We get to talk about for the first time, and I didn't know this until the day we met. Um, Professional poisoners. Uh, I had always assumed that people who might have been professional hitmen, hitwomen, or assassins would have learned something about poisoning, or for people who had some sort of in the past apothecary um, type of training or knowledge, or is a proficient of theirs, they would have known um, about plants. And depending on the individual, they might have been willing to sell poison or not. But that all got thrown out the water when we met last month, and you told me about the lengthy profession of poisoners. So I'm excited to be opening that up and start the new year off with talking about poisoning of all things.
Yes, my favorite subject.
Okay. So
So,
you,
yeah, happy to be
yes.
here.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. So, you were particularly interested in talking specifically about King Louis and all of the, as you described it, Game of Thrones like professional poisoners at his disposal.
Yeah, that was a really interesting time to be alive, or not. Um, Catherine Monvausan was the woman that we are talking about in question here, although she did have rivals and other people surrounding her at the time. Yeah, the one you're talking about is Catherine Monvausan, um, also known as Lavosan. I do not speak French. Pardon my French, literally, quite literally. I may have a French name, but I did not grow up speaking it. So, this was the affair of the poisons went on from 1677 to 1682. It doesn't seem like a long gap, but it is a lengthy gap, a lengthy period of time to be poisoning people in the French court. It's a major French murder scandal during the reign of Louis XVI, where a number of prominent members of the aristocracy were implicated and sentenced on charges of poisoning and witchcraft. Of course, you got to get that good old witchcraft in there.
Can't
Um,
find the evidence, always point to witchcraft.
right? She's a witch burner, and I believe that is actually what they did with Catherine. Um, she's the one I'm thinking of. They did burn her alive. But prior to that, she was a sorceress, a fortune teller, a midwife, and a professional poisoner. Women's work. All the things that go hand in hand. Um,
Poisoning somebody is officially women's work. All
it is
right, you learn
officially.
something new every day.
Well, there is a phrase that's saying poison called that says poisoning is women's work, or poison is the choice of women, the choice weapon of women. It's something along those lines. But I've definitely heard it said that poisoning is women's work, because historically, a lot of the poisoners that we hear about, the famous ones, were women. It's not to say that men didn't poison people. They do. They did, and they still do. But women, I think, get the bad rap because poison tends to seem like it's a little sneaky. But also, just to put it out there, before we really dig into these people, um, their motives weren't always sinister. In the case of Catherine Montbazon or Julia Tofana, um, they were people that were, or they were at least serving people that were often suppressed, and they were kind of like vigilantes in a way, especially when we get into Julia Tofana, who is my personal heroine. She's my favorite. But they were doing this out of necessity. They saw their clients, other women, coming to them all battered and beaten and unable to get out of an abusive marriage because divorce was unheard of. So they would prescribe them a means to an end. Um, and on it went, and a number of them were in fact serial killers. I will not I will not sugarcoat that. Like Amy Archer Gilligan or Marianne Cotton, they were serial killers. They did not have any proper motives. They were just nuts.
They
Um,
just like killing
but
people.
they did, and gaining their inheritance.
I'm just doing it for the money.
That's exactly it. That is literally what they were doing it for the money. And I'm sure they get some sick thrill out of it. So those people were serial killers. The best one, I know I have her written down as the one that poisoned the whole town with strychnine laced chocolates to make it look like she wasn't the target. She was like, "Oh, it was just a bad batch." I've got her name in here somewhere. I always confuse her with Marianne Cotton, but it wasn't Marianne Cotton. It was somebody else. Um,
Killed the whole town with chocolates. It was a sweet ending.
yeah, bittersweet. Bittersweet chocolate, man. Baker's chocolate.
Baker's chocolate.
Yeah. Um, but in the affair of the poisons, Catherine Montbazon, she lived from 1640 to 1680. Um, she was a professional sorceress. That's what she called herself. She often put on a show for her clients. She had like a red crimson cloak with like gold embroidered eagles or phoenixes or something on them, and she would sit with her crystal ball and be a bit of a showboat, and that's what people initially started to go to her for. Although I believe she did begin as like her husband ran a furniture company. Is that one? I have more information on her here. Um, she also provided women with abortions and express status to widowhood, and allegedly held black masses, as one does. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
if you're not going to go to church, might as well hold a black mass.
but she did go to church. In fact, she was arrested, I believe, on the steps of uh wow, why am I blanking there? Notre Dame. Notre Dame, the big
Okay.
ass cathedral that recently burned down. Yeah. She went to mass. I don't think she was a God fearing woman, but she went to church like any good lady would do at the time, just to uphold appearances. You don't want to be accused of witchcraft. How can you be a witch if you go to church, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you'd burst in
Um,
flames otherwise.
yeah. Well, he was a Jew. That's right. She was born Catherine de Shades, and she married a wealthy and active jeweler and silk merchant, Antoine Montbazon. That was um, her original career, I guess. And she took care of the household. She was still a mother and a wife, and I believe her mother lived with her, and she took care of her older mother. Um, so of course she was still a family woman. Um, she upheld her role in society. Um, but she became the network of a head of fortune tellers in Paris, providing poison, aphrodisiacs, abortion services, and magical services to clients in the aristocracy. So again, she was providing services to women during a time when they had pretty much no rights at all,
Yeah.
including the abortion services, which was incredibly beneficial. So she became the central figure, though, in the affair of the poisons. And allegedly, her purported organization commissioned black masses and magic poisoning. She was thought to have killed over 1,000 people, although the number is likely closer to 2,500.
Okay. So they were a ways off, kind of underplaying
Yeah,
it.
yeah. There's a little premeditated going around here. Um, And again, most of her clients were of the upper class. I'm not saying all of them. I'm sure she did help the lower class people when she could, but she was also kind of doing it for the money. So the upper class people need help too. They're also oppressed, at least in um
Got to keep the king happy.
Right, at least in like 15th century France, that's one does. So she, speaking of the king, she ended up being hired by some of his mistresses and as queens, and that's how she ended up in this poisoning ring during the affair of the poisons. And she was her demise ended up being, it was like something got out, whether it was a rumor or true, that she was allegedly involved in a murder plot to kill King Louis the 16th. One of his mistresses had fallen out of favor, and I think she was helping her and providing her with poisons to off the other new mistress, but then it kind of became like, well, why don't we just kill the king while we're at it? I'm sure there was a lot more to it than that. There was a lot of that going around in France, off
Just
with his head.
yeah, just a lot of frequent. Hey, let's just kill the king while we're at it.
Yeah, right. It was the French Game of Thrones, but that could be said for any time period and any royal cabinet, right? That was everywhere and every when. And she did make her living though a little typically, um, at least at the beginning, with palmistry and face reading after her husband's um, company went bankrupt. So it began honestly enough. She put her psychic abilities to good use, and she supported her family. And then what's a little murder between friends, right? Um,
Yeah, why not? Start off doing some honest, trying to help people so you can support the kids and put them through school, and then if murder opportunity comes up, make some money off of it.
yeah, absolutely. Why not? Um, and she did expand her business though after that point, and this is where she started getting into some of the heavier stuff, by providing her clients with talismans and potions and poisons, um, to help further things along. And a lot of it had to do with, love spells or offering a husband so that the lover could come in or just gain his inheritance. But again, a lot of it also was, hey, he's beating me and I'm sick of it. Well, okay, here's the cure. Good luck with that.
Put it in his
Don't
tea.
Yeah, don't let anybody know you got it. But then, they did, and that's how her poisoning ring grew. Um, but she on March 12th of 1679, she was arrested after attending mass at Notre Dame. Not not a black mass that she was said to have held for the royal court, just regular old church at Notre Dame. She was imprisoned and questioned, likely tortured into confession of things that she may or may not have done. She definitely did, at least indirectly, murder over 2,000 people. Um, Uh, and then the authorities captured the rest of her network of fortune tellers and accomplices, many of which who did involve people surrounding the king. Um,
So did she? So she grew at like she had a whole group of people she was working with. She had like her own staff.
yeah, she had like a whole ring of poisoners, and she's not the only one to have done that.
Okay. So she
Yeah,
was like, so she had staffs in multiple businesses too. It wasn't just this little poison ring.
yeah, as far as I know, she had people all over Paris.
Okay. So she grew.
She did. She went from like the fortune teller to La Voisin, the sorceress. She was a professional sorceress, was like quite literally, and professional poisoner. Those were her titles.
Nice.
Yeah, and she's not the only one to have had the official title of professional poisoner. Um, she did have predecessors. On February 1680, she was tried and convicted of witchcraft, and then she executed on February 22nd of 1680. Um, she didn't go quietly, but she was inevitably burned at the stake. I was right. I have it written right here. A dramatic end to a vibrant, albeit short life. Talk about going out in a blaze of glory. Just go big or go home. Die as you live, I guess. Live as you die. Her and her flamboyant outfits, well, she had a flamboyant outfit at the end. Um, but in her life, she did support a family, which again included her mother. She ran the household, and she took on many lovers, including the executioner. Same with what Andre
Wow.
Guglielmi. I don't know how to pronounce that.
She got it on
Guglielmi,
with her executioner.
right? I don't know if it was her specific executioner, but he was an executioner, which is like really taboo. Like those people live lonely lives, but she was like, "Yeah, come here."
That's um that's a really odd thing to be wrapping my head around. Potentially the
Right?
person who was paid to kill her was having a relationship with her.
Yeah. It's wild. Like this whole story is completely wild. It was all true. It happened. But the important thing about Catherine Montbazon is that she provided women with important healthcare services at the time and uh, access to freedom in some regards, during a time when they had limited power and little to no voice. And to me, and I think to maybe other women who know about her, she remains a symbol of female empowerment. Like, she was a hell of a woman, even if she did murder a lot of people, whether she did it by her own hand or here's the cure. Um, she had a lot going on. She
Yeah,
certainly literally went out in a blaze of glory.
yeah. Wow, she had a colorful life that kept kicking off one louder bang after the next.
She was a powder keg. She just went. Like, she was amazing. But around the same time in Italy, 15th century Italy. Oh, by the way, Catherine Maupassant, she had rival poisoners as well.
Yeah,
There
I was
were
gonna
other.
ask about that later. Like you mentioned rivals, but
She had rivals, and I wrote down the name of her rival here, and I can't remember her name. I'm not gonna go through like all of this, but she did have rivals. One in particular who was like another professional sorceress in Paris. I guess that was like the thing to do. Um, but I think that one was jealous that she didn't work for the king. She's like, I wanna off King Louis. He's a scumbag. Why don't you get to do it? You know,
okay.
I
So
guess when you're good at your job, everybody wants a piece.
like were they trying to outmarket each other or like outpoison each other?
It's probably a little bit of both.
Did they try to kill
They
each other at any point?
probably they were probably trying to, but like, how the hell do you kill another professional poisoner? Certainly not with poison. They're gonna know.
Eh, yeah. Um That's a bit of an odd thing. I mean, first, okay, so first, when she was a professional poisoner and she had her rivals as professional poisoners, was this like something they put on business cards, or somebody just approached them at one point and was like, "Hey, I hear you know how to poison people."
That was kind of how it began, and certainly in the case of Julia Tofana, who was in Italy around the same time, um, doing kind of the same thing. Um, like it was like word of mouth. But then Catherine Montbazon became really well known, and she was known for putting on these elaborate acts with her fortune telling and stuff. So like it was in the name. People knew who she was, and that's why she became so good at her job that she ended up working for the king, and then inevitably tried to kill him. So um, it was. While it may have started as like a hush hush thing, she definitely wasn't quiet about it. I think people really did were just like, hey, yeah, she's she's the professional sorceress. I know she had professional sorceress attached to her name, but she was known as a professional poisoner. Whether or not she advertised that part, I don't know, but it was not a secret.
Okay. Did like King Louis like have her in a court like, Hey, this is my professional florist. This is my chef. Oh, this is my poisoner.
Like, he probably did that part. I don't know, but if we want to talk about somebody who did do that, we can time travel back to uh ancient Rome, where Locusta, my other favorite next to Julia Tofana, was Rome's imperial poisoner, and that was in fact her official title.
Okay.
Like, Nero was like, yeah, this is my professional poisoner right here. And she did not try to kill Nero. She helped him attain his position as insane emperor.
Okay.
Yeah, like, so that was a thing. Like, with Locusta of Gaul, she was born in Gaul, and she grew up learning herbalism and of course poisoning. Because if you know herbs, you have to know which ones are gonna kill you, which ones work and which ones work very, very well, such as this one. It's my namesake, Datura. They look a little rough. It's winter, they're little babies right now, but there
Yeah.
they are. They're good. There's baby ones coming up. Look at them, tiny guys. Um, so that one works exceptionally well for what it does. Um, and so Locusta, I believe she was like a young woman, a teenager when she moved to Rome. Finally,
So she
would
would
have
have
been
been a
around
young
like,
adult for the time.
yeah, yeah. And she made her way into the mean streets of Rome, where she learned very quickly that if you wanted to make a quick buck, there were corrupt people everywhere, most of whom were politicians. Surprise. And she made her living like kind of on street corners, being like, "Hey, opening her coat, like, you want poison? I got you." Around 50, 52 CE or AD 52, whatever you want to call it, CE, Common Era. That's around when she arrived in Rome, and she became known as Locusta the Poisoner. Now, it didn't take long for the authorities to catch on to this. So by 54 CE, she was like thrown in jail, and they're like, "We don't care how good you are at your job, get in jail." So she did get arrested. However, um, after she was imprisoned, Empress Agrippina, um, the wife of Emperor Claudius, had heard of her, and she went, "Oh, have I got the job for you?" So she bailed her out of jail. She hired her as an official member of the royal court, and and then we've got Roman Game of Thrones going on here. It was everywhere. And she had her poison Emperor Claudius. And that ensured that her son Nero would then take the throne. But there was a problem. Nero had a brother, Britannicus, and I believe Claudius was killed by the mushrooms. He loved eating mushrooms, and so the Costa poisoned mushrooms, and that killed him. Um, first that's right, because he had an official food tester. She dosed his bodyguard as food tester with a mild poison that agitated his bowels, so he was just kind of indisposed for the night. And so, Claudius was kind of like, okay, whatever, I guess. Um, and then she spread heavier stuff on the plate of mushrooms, which then was the end of Emperor Claudius. Um, but being a cautious man, he kept a feather on hand to regurgitate in case of poisoning. But what he hadn't counted on was that the feather was also poison. So he was done. Nero, of course, also followed in his mother's footsteps and hired Locusta. Um, but he needed to get his brother Britannicus out of the picture, and this took skill because Britannicus certainly had everything run by a food tester. Um, but at a banquet, he was presented with a goblet of piping hot wine, which was not poisoned. When the tester didn't die, Britannicus cooled down the wine with a carafe of cold water. And he immediately began gasping and stopped breathing and dropped dead in the middle of the banquet, to which Nero, his brother, promptly assured everyone that everything was fine and his brother was prone to fits and seizures and he would be okay in the morning. Carry on, you know, again, as one does. When in Rome.
Yeah, when in Rome.
When in Rome, yeah. Um, so yeah, he literally died in front of everyone. Uh, so then Locusta went on to become the imperial poisoner of Rome as appointed by Emperor Nero. And he is known as the evil and mad emperor, which he was. He had, I want to say it was syphilis. He had something wrong with him, and whatever it was enough to drive anybody mad. But I'm sure he was also seriously mentally ill. Um, I believe he is cited as having laughed while Rome burned to the ground, like laughing in his tower. Probably started the fire.
There's
But
also a
Locusta,
rumor that he played his violin as Rome burned too.
he probably did. The guy was out of his fucking mind. Out of his mind. Um, but he was good to Locusta, and he granted her large swaths of land. He gave her the life. She had several like homes, probably miniature palaces. And she also opened up a school so that other women could learn the fine art of poisoning.
Locusta's School of Professional Poisoning.
That's exactly what it was. Yep. Um,
Okay. I'm gonna put that somewhere within like my top 10 right there for schools.
and Nero, he also pardoned Locusta for her past grievances. To her benefit, lived a few happy years murdering people, as one does at the direction of the imperial family. And with her school and her many estates, she was happy for a time until the Senate decided to come for Nero and everyone who worked for him. And then, the gig was up, and she ruefully told them to stab her in the womb, but they, of course, didn't, and she was chained and paraded through the streets like they loved to do in ancient Rome, and executed. In some of the stories, say that involved sodomy with a giraffe.
They knew how to kill people in some entertaining ways.
Yeah, I don't know how the giraffe thing worked. Giraffes are, I mean, I guess if the giraffe, they did weird things with animals. We're not going to get into it. I guess that's enough to kill someone. Goddamn. But
If you know the myth of the Minotaur, the Romans loved recreating that in the
yeah,
Roman Colosseum. And it was also used as a form of being able to execute a number of people.
and she died in 69 CE. It's when Locusta, I guess, met her end. Um, but if we want to talk more like following Locusta's footsteps, uh, we also have Julia Tofano. I keep talking about. She was in 15th century Italy, and she also ran a poisoning ring. And she was providing women in all classes. A lot of them were in the lower classes with means to an end, and she was a professional cosmeticist, and that ran in the family. That was her mother taught her the fine art of poisoning, and then Julia passed it on to her daughter, and then they ran a poisoning ring for like 30 years, and that involving members of the clergy. Like the church was in on this, probably the Catholic Church, because it was Italy. I don't. I know she was in Rome at one point. She moved around a bit. I believe she was also in Naples. I don't remember where she was when they finally found her. Um, but she provided women with a means to an end because they would come to her with battered, bruised faces and bodies, and she got really sick of it. She was actually what she was doing originally was for providing them with makeup, which was mostly lead and arsenic based to cover up the bruises on their faces. And she was like, no, 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 enough's enough. I'm sick and tired of providing you with the treatment. Here's the solution. And then, of course, they would inherit his money and be free of the evil husband. And so she was a vigilante of her time. I truly believe Julia did it for the right reasons. She did not seem to be doing it. I'm sure she made a lot of money doing it, but I don't think it was like Catherine Bazan, where she was definitely in it for the money. Um, and Julia had many accomplices, just like Catherine did. This is around the same time. Um, and her daughter was one, and a priest. Uh, and so her chief product, which I have a little cardboard printout of it, says Aqua Tofana. Her infamous Aqua Tofana. It's called like Aqua de Saint something, Saint Bernard. Anyway, it became known as Aqua Tofana because it was in a pretty little crystal or glass bottle that would fit nicely on the nightstand. It was clear. It was like facial toner. But what it was in fact a concoction of arsenic, belladonna, lead, probably other poisons. Um, it was some nice stuff. Definitely got the job done. And it was like a 2 or 3 dose, 4 at the most. Rhymes. It's like a Dr. Seuss book. And
It's a Dr. Seuss book of poisoning.
that was sold at Locusta's school for poisoning. That was the manual.
One drops,
Um,
2 drops, 4 drops. Guarantees
that,
their heart stops.
yeah, exactly. And that is what Julia prescribed. That's how she did it. It was like a little bit to agitate the bowels, a little bit more to keep him bedridden, and then by the third or fourth dose, that was enough to do him in. And of course, the wife during the time, this allowed her, since she was the keeper of the husband's everything, it allowed her plenty of time to make the arrangements and sign over his estate and all of his money into her name because she was often the sole benefactor. So made gave her plenty of time to make the final arrangements and ensure a good life for herself. But, sadly, as we've seen, all good things must come to an end, and Julia was eventually arrested. Um, but the somebody got cold feet. Like, she was very hush hush about it, but she did have a huge poisoning ring, and like she ran it for 30 years, so she couldn't have been that hush hush. And it was like she would start with like only the people that she trusted, and they were definitely more discreet than Catherine Montbazon was. But because Catherine's only lasted a few years, Julia lasted a long time. And eventually, one client got cold feet and she was trying to poison her husband in the soup. And she was like, wait, no, don't eat that. And of course, then she had to spill the beans. Um, yeah.
A,
So,
a client got a conscience.
yeah, only one in all of that time, though. One. It tells you something. That was her undoing, though. Um, Julie was a beloved figure within her community, especially women. She also went to church. She was a beloved figure within the church that she attended. And again, they were in on it. They were in on the poisoning ring. At least one priest was, and she was when the gig was up, when people were after her, she was granted sanctuary by a local church until a rumor began about her poisoning the town's water supply, which wasn't true. There would have to be a lot of poison in that water to do anything. Um, and she was eventually arrested and brutally tortured until she confessed to killing over 600 men from like 1633 to about 16 oh to oh when she was 13, from 1633 when she was 13 to 1651 in Rome alone. So it wasn't quite 30 years, but she died in they were hung in Campo de Fiore in 1659, but it was still a large chunk of time that she was active and murdering people, or helping people murder other people. And dozens of lower class women were also executed after it was discovered that they'd been customers of Julia's, um, and while their upper class counterparts were just imprisoned and not executed. I don't know what's worse in 15th century Italy. No good deed goes unpunished, though, right? But Julia's legacy became the stuff of legends. She is still talked about today. She has become a centerpiece of folklore, and her poisons directly affected and influenced the affair of the poisons in France, which we just talked about. Um, this led to the rise of Levelson, and even Mozart, over 100 years after Julia's death, alleged to having been poisoned by aqua tofana. It is said that on his deathbed, the famous composer proclaimed, "I am sure that I have been poisoned. I cannot rid myself of this idea. Someone has given me aqua tofana and calculated the precise time of my death." He was born over 100 years after Julia died. So that is quite a legacy. It's amazing.
It became a common saying 100 years later.
Yeah, and people like me are still talking about Aqua Tofana. You can go on Etsy too and find interesting, um, a lot of interesting stuff on that.
Yeah, a lot of interesting fan made things, and I'm pretty sure there's lots of Aqua Tofana antiques.
Oh, there are. I've made my own, certainly. Little empty bottles that say Aqua Tofana, and there is a little 8 by 10 poster board uh decoration that I have that says Aqua Tofana on it. You can find pillows embroidered with it. I even saw it at TikTok. Someone said, um, Aqua Tofana is zero wave feminism.
So you did talk also about the cosmetics. Back during that time period, I think a lot of people don't know that cosmetics, there's a lot of makeup made out of lead.
And
Um,
arson. It was in there too.
yeah. Did people, I mean, I'm going to guess people weren't really aware that lead is going to kill you.
I don't think they were. They knew arsenic was poison. That they knew, and they didn't care. They thought that little doses of these poisons were okay. But the problem was that, and they weren't even in small doses, but the problem was continuous use of those small doses really was, they were poisoning themselves every day. A small dose became a large dose, became death.
The steroids approach, just start out with a little bit under your tongue and build up over time.
Yep. And there were people that ate arsenic though. There were arsenic eaters. They weren't poisoning people, they were poisoning themselves. But like they were like in Austria, and these arsenic eaters, they thought it like made them stronger and better looking and enhanced their performance and everything. And they were consuming arsenic. They would mine the arsenic in their hills near where they live, and then they would like boil it into like some, like they would grind it up and do it to a powder, and then they would put it in like something fatty, usually like butter or like fat based something like lard based, and they would put it on toast and they would just eat it.
Oh man.
And
Oh.
the arsenic eaters of Austria, peasants of the Austrian province of Styria, who consumed high levels of arsenic as a stimulant and tonic from the 15th century to the 1950s. That's it. Right. They believed the mineral could make them stronger, less tired, and able to work harder and lift trees, which is ironic because if you're consuming arsenic, you're bedridden. But not these guys. It was a stimulant. Look, it's arsenic, not cocaine. Okay, I know they're not. They're both white powders, but Come on, calm down.
I guess they don't
They
make them
don't,
like how they used to anymore.
right? I don't like arsenic. I just like the way it smells. Um,
Oh my God. Okay,
um,
so until the 1950s, you had people consuming arsenic in Austria.
yeah,
What
and they thought it
other
was
of absurd things like people looked at? Because I know that as far as like the Victorian period, when people started finding out about radioactive material, I know that there's some people
radium.
that were absolutely convinced they were going to make like this was going to be something that had a medicinal property to it. And this would be prescribed, this would be sold, these would be used in treatments, and it would like deform and kill people and mess them up for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, that was radium you're thinking of,
Radium.
and yeah, in this case, these people, the Austrian arsenic eaters, were, they absolutely thought it was the same mentality. They thought it was a magical cure for everything. You know, good old arsenic, the cure all end all.
Pure
Um,
Orlando. But do we have other
yeah,
ones? Like, were there other things people were trying out?
there were. I mean, they had mercury in a lot of stuff that I think they knew was poisonous, but like again, lead was commonly used in cosmetics. I believe there was also mercury in cosmetics, and there were a lot of things over the years. And I would actually like to uh, do a little bit more research on that now that you've mentioned it, because like I always think of radium, and that's the common one everybody thinks of because they were convinced like that radium was this amazing thing, and it was killing them, like insane. But throughout history, we've gone through these crazy fads of things that are in no way good for you. Um, and I mean, the interesting thing about them putting it on their bodies is like they weren't just powdering themselves with it; they're wearing it in their clothing. You had the mercury and the lead in the hats. That's why we get the term Mad Hatter. You had arsenic in the clothing and in the makeup and in like uh accessories, and you hear of shadeless green, also known as emerald green, Paris green, or arsenic green, and that was a huge thing in the Victorian era, and they were convinced that it was okay to wear, and they would wear these stunning green dresses that when they switched from like gas to incandescent lighting, I guess it looked even better in the dance hall. So while you were sweating and dancing up a storm and impressing the fellas, I guess, the arsenic and whatever else was in there was seeping into your pores because you were sweating. And there was like a Parisian florist who dropped dead after making like an artificial florist. She was making like hair flowers and like artificial flowers. It was in the wallpaper too. And again, so were things like mercury. Uh, but they thought that it was okay to put in the wallpapers because you weren't licking it, hopefully, the wall candy.
Now you're talking about cosmetics, um, or small miscellaneous things. You talk about uh, artificial flowers for the hair. What were other things that qualify, and wallpaper? What were other things that qualified as that, as those,
As safe. Um,
or miscellaneous objects that people were?
oh, um, well, children's toys, which were painted with Shayla's green, invented by Carl Wilhelm Scheele, incidentally, I believe it was in France in like 1735 or something. And also, as a note about the wallpaper, they thought it was perfectly safe, but when the wallpaper got damp, it would flake or it would create arsenical gas. So it was in the air. It had nothing to do with licking the wallpaper. It was in the air they were breathing. in some form or another, including as a gas. They also thought that, yeah, paints, children's toys, um, everything, like clothing. Oh, I have a miser pouch, which there we go. Now you can see the it without the reflection. So this is a miser pouch. This would have been owned by a man. It is made out of velvet, and you can't see it, but there, I mean, there's pewter. You know, pewter's kind of toxic too. If you touch it enough, and on the top of it, there's actually a beautiful amethyst, like a gem cut amethyst. But it is in this case for its protection and our own. And you see the chartreuse green, little bit of lacing there. It's called a miser pouch because this would have been owned by probably a wealthy man. And he would have kept his valuables and his money on him because mugging was very common in the Victorian era. But he would have kept it like in his vest pocket, his coat pocket, or in like even he would have kept it in something that didn't look like this. This was the decoy. So if he got mugged, they would run away with the miser pouch, which had little to no value in it. But you see that beautiful emerald green color, that is arsenic green. That thing is loaded with arsenic. And a lot of times you would see it more as a chartreuse as well. So this is an example of an accessory. But then it was everywhere like this. I have two different examples of books. It was in book bindings. It's that beautiful same color, Egyptian classical antiquities. And then this one here um, is the Arabian Nights. And they're really quite beautiful. I mean, they're gorgeous. I just wouldn't want to touch it. And so these are some real life examples of what they were using it in. It's still used today, I believe, in glass production. It was used heavily, I'm sure, in glass production then. And it turns green, by the way, during a chemical reaction with copper. Copper carbonate? Copper, not to be confused with copper carbonite. I always get those two confused. But anyway, when you combine the two, because of the pigments, because of the copper, you get this gorgeous green color. And it's a byproduct of the Industrial Revolution. That's how they, well, when they were coming up with all of this stuff. And so they just put it in everything. Not a big deal. A little bit of arsenic is fine. What's a little bit of arsenic amongst friends, right? And our children, like, oh, they would dip meat in it too to keep flies away because they believed that a little bit of arsenic was safe.
Oh, okay. So it was also a unhealthy preservative too.
There was
Okay, so
mal
I see why so many people really love the look of the Victorian era and never the
yeah. There was formaldehyde in milk, by the way, back then, and purified cow brains to give it a rich, creamy flavor because they were watering it down to be really cheap. And, you know, if there's also formaldehyde in bread, because if it was enough to keep corpses fresh, it was safe to eat, right? Right?
right. Okay. Wow. That's quite the cringe. Oh
And
my God.
it makes you rethink what a great time it would be to time travel to the Victorian age. You couldn't eat anything, you couldn't drink anything. They were drinking the absinthe in Paris out of pewter cups, which are full of lead. Shit, there was probably arsenic in that too. It was green. It's not how you it's not how you make absinthe, but you know, they were lacing all kinds of stuff with all kinds of stuff.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. That's I don't know if there's any words for something like that. It just speaks for itself.
It it does. It certainly does. Oh, and if you want to own your own piece of arsenic, you can go to your local crystal shop and chances are good they're selling it.
So they sold arsenic too in the stores. Okay,
Oh,
this
they
is
still do. Back then, I don't know if they sold Bumblebee Jasper, but I've got a piece of it right there, and it contains arsenic, and you can buy it in any crystal shop if they have Bumblebee Jasper.
okay. Well, there is a difference between now when people are making Bumblebee Jasper and then selling it on shelf as a finalized product, different to back in the day when they just go, hey, let's just sell arsenic off the shelf because it's a
Well,
popular trend.
yeah, this is a little bit different. The Bumblebee Jasper has been polished. You wouldn't then the cases where you find ones and there's a little piece that's not quite polished and it's white, maybe don't touch that part. But the crystals that you see today, Bumblebee Jasper, which isn't a true Jasper, it just looks like Jasper. Um, I don't know, is it an agate? I don't remember what exactly it's classified as, but it's yellow, gray, and white. And the yellow is sulfur. The gray, that might also, I don't think the gray is arsenic, although arsenic can be gray, but the white in it is typically arsenic. And you can hit because there's like a lacquer on it, and that's keeping you safe from inadvertently poisoning yourself. But it is just sold on the shelf as like a thing, and I kind of laugh every time I see it. It's beautiful, and it is safe to handle mostly, but it reminds me very much of the Victorian age where you could just go out and buy this book and handle it, or buy a gorgeous emerald green sofa and sleep on it. And then when it got damp, if it was like in your little foyer outside with like the screens or whatever, and it got kind of damp in there, it was releasing the gas into the air.
Healthy,
Very healthy.
super
Good
healthy.
for good for what ails you forever. In fact, you'll never be sick ever again.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. It's quite a savory subject.
It is. Yeah, I know a place nearby that was a 19th century arsenic mine because it's loaded with it. Some areas are just rich in it. It's a naturally um occurring mineral. It's used in high speed semiconductors today, thankfully, in things we can't really touch. I'm sure it's in your phones somewhere. Right for conducting electricity. It is naturally occurring, but thank gods we've hopefully moved away from the days where we could just like, go out and buy it like this. Although I will say this was out on display in a antique shop that had absolutely no idea where it was, and people could just touch it.
Okay, moral of the story, always be careful when handling Victorian era products, especially if they are that color of green.
Yes, I mean a little bit of handling is fine as long as you wash your hands after.
I mean, anything else you wanted to cover with these mysterious poisoners?
Um, I was gonna go into the ones that were actually serial killers. We've been talking for a while here now. If you want, I could certainly go on that on a different day. Lady poisoners, that kind of consolidate. They do run the gambit. There are all kinds of stories from all different eras of these women who defied societal expectations, took things into their own hands, and either did what they had to do to survive. Julia also definitely poisoned her husband, who was abusive. It's up for debate, but she did it. Um, and then like help some of them helped other people get out of dire situations. Somebody you wouldn't expect. And then you have serial killers like Marion Cotton and Amy Archer Gilligan. So it's not it's not what you would expect. It's not all in one. It's not really a neat thing that we can like we want to make sense, like tidy sense of these things, like, oh, this person did it because, well, no, they did it for different reasons. Does it make it right at the end of the day? That's a question of morals in some of the cases. Maybe not, but maybe if they were freeing people from really dire situations. I don't have a proper ethical answer for that. Because that blurs the lines. So when we're talking about uh we're talking I mean, talking about poison, that's one thing, and you can go different avenues with that, as we've seen, botanical, mineral, etc., clothing. Um, but when you're talking about the people involved, it's hard because we need to realize that they're human, particularly these women. They were human and they were living at different time periods that we may not be familiar with. And, aside from the serial killers, them, I'm just like, well, they're
It's
silly
a
too.
serial killer. A serial killer is a serial killer.
Yeah, that goes without saying. Like, forget them. They made their mark on history for sure, but that's they are their own thing. Um, but these other people, they were human. And again, they were caught in times of survival. And it's important to keep that in mind.
Yeah, it definitely is. History. It's one of those. Another situation where I think mostly because the time period it turns more into a black and white. And I mean, not a black and white. It turns more into a gray scenario than it would be a black and white scenario.
Yeah, there's a lot of gray area here. And such as we see in the case of good old arsenic, it takes on many forms and many colors and many shapes.
Yeah, and people didn't know it was that poisonous at the time.
Yeah, and well, the thing in the Victorian era is like they did, but they didn't care or like that poisonous. They knew it was poisonous, but the Victorians were out of their freaking minds. And also, when you look at plants that are poisonous, also you can see behind me beautiful Leviathan, my house plant, one of my house plants. He's a monstera. His name is Leviathan because he's huge. He's humongous. Also, those plants, poisonous plants. They take on all shapes and forms and colors, right? Just like flowers do, and they serve their own ecological niche. And some of them can be very beneficial in the right dosages. Some of them are just there for they just exist. Like Monstera does grow a fruit, by the way, that is edible, but only when it's ripe, but in the right conditions. Some of them are just there for display. You're not going to use them to poison people, and it's that kind of complexity, all shapes and forms and colors that we need to keep in mind. And most people don't, because like, why would you think of that?
Yeah, why would you? It sounds completely irrational to look at the complexity of history.
It does. It's like you ever just sit in a place, especially like a place has a lot of history, and wonder like how many people sat there before you, taking in that same view. It's along those same lines. History is wild.
It is. It definitely is. All right, well, Renee, thank you for taking the time to talk about poisoners. I'm pretty sure this is a conversation you and I can continue on another day.
Absolutely. I could do I feel like each and every one of these people could be their own separate episode. They don't have to be, but they could because it's a human life. There's so much involved in it. Just one person.
Just the
We're
one.
we're the same. We're the same. I'm a healer, and here I am talking about poison.
Killing.
Healing, yes, and certain look, the singing bowls back there. That's what I really do. Um, and I make healing salves out of my datura. So yeah, there's all sorts of avenues. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, thank you for coming on.